Welcome back to Five on the Floor. I am your host, Greg Sylvander. With me for tonight's or today's episode, depending on when you're listening to this, is my co-host Alex Toledo. You can follow him on Twitter at Tropical Blanket. Of course, you can find me at Greg Sylvander. No Ethan Skolnick. He has the night off. We are here on the heels of Miami's 103-93 victory in New Orleans to close out the first half of the season and head into this mini all-star break. The performance was capped off by a pretty spectacular Jimmy Butler game, which I think we're going to get into Jimmy Butler a little bit more in depth as we get into the episode. But overall, they finished with a victory. This was one that, coming off of that loss to Atlanta, I think like the fan base collectively felt a little bit like they were walking on eggshells going into this game. They wanted to get a victory, you get a feel good moment before you catch your breath for the second half. Alex, what were your takeaways from tonight, just generally, before we dive into it a little bit more in depth?
Well, it's funny, like looking through what happened tonight between the two teams and kind of they were even with 3 pointers made, almost even in rebounding, almost even in turnovers. So I thought it was, and considering the fact that the Heat were pretty much in control for most of the game, and other than that, those couple runs that the Pelicans had where they brought it back down to like 4 points or whatever it was, like the Heat were really in control despite all of these different team statistics being so even. So I think that's pretty impressive. And especially, without Bam there, I know the Pelicans didn't have Zion, but we've seen how fractured this team can be when it's missing one of their best players. And for them to put together that type of performance, by the way, against the streaking Pelicans, like they've been pretty hot as of late. Again, without Zion, I know, but I'm pretty encouraged by it all just because I think you saw a great team effort on both ends of the floor. I thought that, there was a lot of zone, a lot of different coverages once again. And like, I thought they executed it really well. I thought there weren't a lot of mistakes. I thought, like I didn't see a lot of guys getting blown by on the drive. And I know that's kind of what a zone is for, is to disrupt that rhythm at the top. But overall, like it's just more of the same when it comes to the defensive side. They're just really connected on that end, despite the lack of defensive players that they have, especially again without Bam on the floor. That you got two guys who you consider good defensive players with Jimmy Butler and Andre Iguodala, and the rest of them are just kind of average. And whether you want to call it below average or not, I think it's really impressive that the Heat could continue to string together such like impressive defensive games.
No, and I'm glad you actually said without Bam Adebayo, because when you talk about the defense tonight, I mean, to hold New Orleans to 39% shooting, 25% from three. New Orleans was 11 of 43 from the 3-point line tonight. To keep the rebounding as close to even as possible. There were a lot of moments, where there were some second chance opportunities by New Orleans that got a little hairy, but overall you're keeping New Orleans at bay from a offensive perspective. You took care of the ball, only 10 turnovers. And I think like this is another reflection of you see when you have Jimmy and Goran both there, that a lot of that stuff starts to clean itself up. Iguodala had a hell of a fourth quarter, so I want to make sure we unpack his game a little bit here. But
One more thing, not to cut you off, but I was talking before about how they're so even and all these other stats, and you were talking about how they forced the Pelicans into such a bad shooting night from three. And like I said, they're pretty much even in 3 pointers made, but the Pelicans did take more field goals and more threes by a significant amount. So that is also a recurring theme, that the Heat are taking less shots than other teams, and despite that, again, control of the game.
yeah, I mean 10 more field goal attempts at the basket New Orleans got, and
Without
13.
Zion, like I don't even understand that,
Right.
to be
I
honest.
know. And without Steven Adams having like 25 rebounds. And then also, they got 13 additional 3-point attempts. And usually the way the analytics works out, and this is deep in the metrics in the Excel spreadsheets that I only log into pivot tables and that kind of stuff during the day. Um, like it, it's it, it's I don't know even know where I was going with that. See, this is a late podcast here. So let me just immediately pivot it back to where I wanted to initially go, was this and we're going to touch on a number of players, but I want to start here because we brought up Jimmy first. He was magnificent. I mean, like you look at his box score, I think he was in control of the game pretty much start to finish. There were moments here and there where other guys were chipping in, but for the most part, 10 of 14, got to the line 9 times, made 8 of them. 9 assists, 3 turnovers, 3 steals, 3 rebounds, 29 points. I mean, it's a great Jimmy Butler performance. We continue to see him play so well coming out of the break. And I guess where I want to go with this, and this is where we're gonna zig and zag a little bit more than Ethan does when he's directing traffic here. But do you think like that we're reaching a point where this team is almost like relying on Jimmy too much? Have we got there yet?
I think that's more than fair to say. And I think that's kind of something we've seen when you talk about, like you guys talked about earlier this week, the team with and without them. It's so obvious that without Jimmy Butler, like it's just such a huge puzzle piece to be missing. And they just don't have enough of an inside out balance without him. And I think he's the most important piece to the puzzle as far as like a guy who I think you take out Jimmy and that's the most impactful loss. And maybe that's, not a crazy thing to say, that you're worse without your best player. Maybe that's pretty obvious, but like, it's just so different when Jimmy's off than versus when Bam's off. And obviously Bam is super important to everything they do on both ends, but Jimmy is the calming presence. Jimmy's the guy who can get to the free throw line whenever, who can guard multiple positions, always rotates to the right place. And like knows how to slow down the game to his pace whenever he wants, when he feels that the team is kind of giving up a lead, or when he needs to close the game, like we saw tonight. Like he is the most calming presence there is, and I think it has an effect on the rest of the team, especially when they're out there on the floor and they just need that kind of boost of energy. Because I feel like that's been a problem throughout the whole season, is kind of they can't sustain that high level of energy, high level of execution that I feel like we know that they can for throughout the whole game. And I think like what's become evident is they're doing it on defense and not on offense. And Jimmy is the one guy kind of carrying them on the offensive end, even though they have so many weapons, so many shooters and spacers, and they have these complex sets. Jimmy is the guy who slows them down. Jimmy is the guy who makes them, a contender.
Yeah, no, and it's like talk about head of the snake. Jimmy is like the prototypical that in Miami right now. And it's just I start to think about balance and things like that, and just how much can you really put on Jimmy's shoulders all throughout this entire regular season, and then as you head into the postseason. So something to watch for. Before we go to break, I want to call out the performance of Andre Iguodala, because we're not going to spend a ton of time here because the stat line doesn't jump off the page. But before we go to break, I just want to acknowledge how well he played in the fourth quarter. I think he scored 8 of his 10 in the fourth, if I'm not mistaken. So he was a huge factor for them. So I want to definitely give him a shout out, but
8
also
total
to
free
say,
throw attempts.
what's that now? Oh yeah.
8 free throw attempts.
Yeah, 8 free throw attempts. How does Iguodala get 8 free throw attempts? I
He got
have no
hacked there a
idea.
couple times at the end. They were trying to get him to shoot those free throws. A smart move by the Pelicans, but I mean, no, you're right though. Iguodala is giving you a little bit of everything, and I feel like every time like somebody like they're missing a piece, he kind of steps up, and I think that's what you're hoping for in the playoffs. And again, I think that's why, like, not to circle back to the trade talk, but maybe that's why you want to add another 4. It's just kind of you want Iguodala to be fresh and ready for the playoffs, and not giving you a ton of minutes down during the regular season. He played 23 tonight. I think like, you added another 4 in there, get him into like a 15, 17 minute per game role. That would be great, because I want to see more of this Iguodala, especially when it matters most.
Yeah, because I mean he's up last year. It looks like, if I'm reading this correctly, he played somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 minutes a game. So you're gonna want to keep him somewhere in the neighborhood of that. But it's just the games played and the amount of lifting that he's had to do to this point that I just think is worth continuing to monitor as we go forward, just with his age. Uh, we will talk a little bit more about a couple other players who are inconsistent. Alex alluded to, the consistency with Jimmy. We're going to talk about some of the inconsistencies elsewhere right after this word from our sponsors. Okay, welcome back on Five on the Floor. So, coming off the heels of this 103-93 victory over the New Orleans Pelicans, Miami is now 18-18. They head into the break at the 500 mark. If my memory serves me correct, I believe they're 500, right? They're not a game below, right?
Yeah,
It's
believe they're
late.
at
Sorry.
500.
Cool, 500. So I don't know how the standings shake out yet because I haven't seen who lost and the implications of all that, but they've got to be in somewhere hovering in that 4 to 5 range, right? Um, so that's a good thing. Before we talk about like the second half of the season and what we consider a success, because that's where I want to end today. Let's talk about the most um I don't know if bipolar is the right word, but what it's just unbelievable to see the difference between good Kelly and bad Kelly. And when Kelly has it going, what it does for the team. And I know that a lot of the advanced metrics actually say that when Kelly doesn't have it going, it's still good for the team. But tonight, I mean, to be 7 of 8 from the field, 10 rebounds, 7 assists, only 3 turnovers, score 18 points. This is like what I mean, like when we talk about what you want next to Bam, it's like this Kelly, but you don't get this Kelly every night. And so one, I guess, Alex, I'm interested to hear about what you thought about Olynyk's performance tonight, but also, um, like when you see him play like this, uh, isn't it all the more the reinforcement that they got to go get a guy that could do this every single night and not someone who's only a part-time player that does it this way?
Yeah, that's a good point. And look, Kelly was awesome tonight. This is one of the best games we've seen from him in a minute. Like he put it all together tonight. And I think the one thing that's sustainable about it is him being able to be just, abusing deep drop bigs. And that was something that kept happening tonight because Steven Adams is always somebody who is going to drop all the way back on a pick and roll. So you just you run a screen with Kelly there, who was matched up with Adams, and Adams is just going to stick so far back there that you run the pick and pop, and Kelly's going to be wide open. He got hot there in the beginning off of that. He found his rhythm. And, like the beginning of a game like that, just catching a rhythm early on, that makes all the difference, I feel like, especially for somebody like Kelly, who, we talked about this in other episodes, who, like in Gonzaga in high school, I'm sure was a guy who would have the offense run around through him, playing down on the block. And I know he's always been able to shoot, but playing next to Bam, he's pretty much been a spacing big. That's been his role. And so I think maybe that's not a role. I mean, he's gotten used to it over the years, but actually hitting those shots early on, I'm sure does something for your confidence as a shooter who didn't grow up as necessarily as a spot up shooter,
It's
right?
true. Yeah.
And so maybe I'm digging too deep into the psychology aspect of it all, but like Kelly is somebody who can do this to a lot of different bigs who just drop back into the paint. If you want to talk about other Eastern Conference teams who have bigs like that, you look at the Bucks and the Nets with DeAndre and Brook Lopez. Obviously, Lopez is a much higher level defender than DeAndre is in that role right now. But there are bigs like that all around the league who Kelly will be able to find openings with running pick and pops, and that was evident tonight. I mean, you got him going, and then he started getting going on the move and getting down, to the rim. And when Kelly gets his confidence like that, he's a different player, man.
No, and like we saw it in the finals too. Like he came out and played, and he was as good as we could have expected. And so he has those moments. And I think that the Heat are going to have to find a balance between um how they improve the roster. Like I guess I keep coming back to this, and we're not going to go far off into trade land. I promise everyone, because there's going to be a lot of talk about that in the next month or so as we gear up for March 25th when the deadline approaches. But um, like you just when you see Olynyk play like this, I don't know that they're going to be able to find a player without like Olynyk is providing so much of a key role, and so is Iguodala, and those were supposed to be your big expirings that you're going to like throw into a trade to get a big name player. I think it just presents an interesting conundrum that they're in, where the players that they thought were going to be salary filler to some degree are ending up becoming such big key contributors. Alex, do you think that like the Mo Harkless, Myers Leonard stuff is realistic to go get anybody, or are they going to actually have to part with one of these guys that's part of the regular rotation?
It's a really interesting question, and I think you and me are both set in ideally, I would like to keep Kelly and Andre, and it relates to what we were talking about before with Andre too. Like the both of them, you want them in a lesser role, helping out the team, from the bench, and maybe let's say they were to trade for a four. I don't know that they would just go right back to bringing Kelly off the bench. But I just mean, once the playoffs get started, you'll probably rely on that four more, just like they did with Crowder. And I think that's kind of the ideal place for both Iguodala and Kelly to get the most out of them and not to have to, rely on them so much. And I think that's the overarching theme here. And like they can step up when needed, but I still think they're short one guy there at that four spot. And look, you saw what happened last year in the bubble. Kelly, he got less playing time. Iguodala got more playing time. And I think, we saw Crowder starting. Maybe Spo thinks that Bam is just, when it's winning time, Bam is a five, and you need to have reliable fours there to help you out. And it's going to be really important because although the perimeter defense hasn't been as much of a talking point because their overall defense has been so good, that's still going to be a problem in the playoffs versus some of the best players. Like you need to have that perimeter defense locked the hell down. And I know Kelly's done a good job in that starting lineup, but it's almost the same thing as Myers. Kelly's obviously a better player than Myers, and I think that's why you want to add to this core without trading them. I know that it took, a minute for me to get to that point here, but I just don't know how realistic it is to trade Myers and Mo without having to also give up like a first or Precious or something like that. But
yeah, and I
could
think
you
that's
come
where
up
they're
with a
gonna have
deal
to
like for
go.
one of these guys that we've talked about, like a Rudy Gay or a Thad Young? If you're just giving those two contracts, what would you throw in there as a sweetener? I think that's kind of because it's going to have to be a sweetener in there.
Yeah, no, and it's one of the young guys you just talked about. It's
Kendrick Nunn too, I
whatever.
guess, we thrown in there.
Yeah, I mean, whatever kind of picks they could do. But you're right. I mean, like, because like Kendrick Nunn is not going to get thrown into a deal at this point. Like that. That's not where we are. So you're right. It's like which one of those young players would entice somebody to take on the 1 year kind of non-functional deals of Mo Harkless and Myers Leonard. But we're gonna save trade talk for another episode because we could go down that rabbit hole, and this could end up becoming an hour-long episode. I want to close kind of on a note of two players that were talked about on Onside Radio by our host Ethan Skolnick, and he talked about Lonzo Ball and Tyler Hero. And if my memory serves me correct, and a listener told me that this happened, so I hope I'm not like following fake information here, but Ethan said that he would trade Tyler Hero for Lonzo Ball. As I looked at them both tonight, neither of them played well. Tyler Hero did not have a bounce back game, and that was something I was hoping for. He was 1 of 6 from the field in 27 minutes, and 0 of 2 from 3, only had 2 points. Lonzo Ball, 4 of 16 from the field, 2 of 11 from 3. I want to highlight that because he's shooting 46% in 15 games in the month of February from 3.
And around 38% for the season on a good amount of attempts, like six,
Yeah.
7 attempts a game.
So he had a horrible night from 3.
He shouldn't be taking that many shots.
So
Lonzo Ball needs to be a role player, not a guy taking 16 shots, I think.
yeah, no, they definitely have him cast in a role where he's doing a little bit too much. I agree with you there.
And Zion's the most important part of their offense. So that's not something that can be, I can't emphasize that enough. Like they've been so much hotter as of late because of that turn where it's like Zion is the biggest part of their offense and Ingram is right there behind him. And Zion, and even without Zion, they were able to get to the rim a lot more and get more attempts off than the Heat. But they really are just missing a whole lot when he's not on the floor. Like Lonzo is not somebody who can consistently attack the rim or I think, make enough threes without the star players there, kind of making it easier for him, similar to a Kendrick Nunn. And by the way, Nunn and Hero both struggled tonight. Not really worried about that, but that's also something that happened. But yeah, like I feel I would not trade Tyler Hero for Lonzo Ball. There's no
Thank
way.
you. Neither would I.
There's
Like
no
I
way.
wouldn't even think about it. Like
I
it's
like Lonzo a lot. I think
conversation.
he'll be a really nice fit for this team, actually. But
For sure.
I don't see a realistic deal there because there's just no way I'm trading Hero for Lonzo. I'm not cashing in the Hero asset for Lonzo Ball.
No, I agree. I'm with you there. And when I look at this New Orleans box
Collins.
score, haha, you see like Alexander Walker off that bench, a guy we talked about at draft time. We got to see a little bit of him tonight, Kyra Lewis Jr. You just see these point guards that they have there. Eric Bledsoe obviously is playing alongside Lonzo Ball right now. I don't think that they're committed to Lonzo Ball long term. So I think he could be had. It's just a matter of what does he do, where does he fit, and what do you have to give up. And I'm not giving up Tyler Hero for him, but I just wanted to at least acknowledge that both those guys didn't have great shooting nights, and I would rather have Tyler Hero. So we get that on the books
I don't think I
here.
give up Duncan for him either.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't know if I would either, because I guess you're trading Lonzo knowing that you're extending him, and you're probably extending him at somewhere in the range of $20 million a year, right? I mean, he's probably going to get something like that.
I
Am
think he's
I?
gonna get below that. I think he would be anywhere from like, I
I
don't
oh,
know,
oh I was
similar to Duncan. I mean,
overestimate
I'm
these
guessing.
things.
I'm guessing. I got no idea. I doubt that he would get more than 20 million a year. I think it would be around 15 to be honest, but who knows?
So, trade talks aside, I want to look ahead a little bit, and we're going to have a lot of episodes coming up about the second half of the season, and we've got some. We're trying to procure some good guests for the show for the second half, and to gear up for the stretch run. What I want to ask you is something that I asked the guys during the pregame show. And I don't think you were there. And I think it was today's pregame. These days are all running together. This week has been crazy. Um, for the second half of the year, Alex, I want to ask you this. So the standings in the East are so damn close, right? Like the teams separate 4 through 10 are within a half game, a game, whatever it is. Would you say that the Heat, if they finish 4 or they finish 5, but they're still like this middling sub 500 team, like, do you consider that a success if you get to the finish line of the regular season as a 4 or 5 seed and you make it there, but you're still kind of, your record is this like sub 500 stuff? Or is really the true measure of success in the second half them creating enough separation where they can get to 3, 4, 5, 6 games above 500?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it would be ideal to create that separation, but no, we on the I want to say the post game stream the other night, Ethan asked a similar question about, but he finished it off with up to this point has it been a success, even with the circumstances grading on a scale, and I said no because I knew everybody else was going to say yes, so I just wanted to play the heel there and just go for the joke, but really I just think they absolutely could have done better. There was, a handful, maybe more bad losses that they absolutely could have won. And, most teams have games like that. This is not just the Heat problem. So I feel like fans of other teams can say a lot of the same things for their own teams. But even still, um, there was a lot to, I think be negative about until, the past couple weeks. And so I feel like if I had to grade their first half, it would be like a C plus. But if you're talking about going through the end of the season and finishing 4 or 5, I think that's a success. I think that's a success for sure, because especially if you get 4, you get that home court advantage seed. And honestly, now we got to start thinking about the standings in that part, because it's like you need to keep yourself out of Brooklyn's bracket and keep them a team that you would see theoretically in the conference finals and not in the first or second round. And I think that should be the most important thing, because if I'm just trying to think about it from Miami's end, right? Because it's like if
Yeah.
I'm the Heat brass, I'm not looking at any other team in the East and being scared of them. I still stick with
That's
that,
true.
except Brooklyn, or at least like we don't want to see that team until the furthest we can. And that's just kind of how I feel right now. Play the standings game once the season starts to finish a little bit. But as of right now, they just got to hold on and actually get up there, because I still think they're hovering around 6 or 7. And like you said, 4 through 10, like almost have the same exact amount of losses, which is pretty insane, because usually you think of the 4 seed versus the 10 seed, and it's supposed to be a big gap of quality of play, but it's just
Yeah.
not this year.
I think I really like what you say about Brooklyn, and that being the one team that they need to avoid. I think if you injected truth serum into anyone in the Heat organization, including the players, like, they think and they know in their hearts they could beat Philly and they could beat Milwaukee. And like you mentioned, playoff seedings. I'm looking at the updated standings right now. The Heat are 6th currently at 518-18. So they would, if the playoffs started today, they would face off against the Milwaukee Bucks in the 3-6 matchup.
Oh man, the
I
Bucks
think
do
they would
not
like
want
that
that.
matchup actually. So like, this is like getting to your point. Like, they ain't scared of Boston, and they're not scared of Milwaukee. And Philadelphia, like as well as they've played, Brooklyn is creeping on a come up there for that 1 seed. And all these other teams in the East, Miami is not scared of. Like Brooklyn is the one team, and I think a lot of it has to do with, for me personally, it's one, obviously the top tier talent. When you have 3 guys, it's unbelievable, but it's the Durant monster. That's the part of it that like you start to get outclassed when you talk about having to figure out how to do something against Kevin Durant in a 7-game series. Those other guys, I think you can figure out ways to survive a James Harden, survive a Kyrie Irving. You don't survive Slim Reaper. So like that's the guy I'm trying to avoid, and I'm with you there. Um, so I'll ask you this as you talk about avoiding in the standings. Do you think Brooklyn gets all the way up to the number 1 seed, which then would mean you would want to get into the 3-6 bracket, right? So that you stay out
Yep.
of Brooklyn's way. This is going to get tricky here.
Or 2-7. So yeah, I mean they're 2 right now. They're a half game behind the Sixers. So that's obviously a really fluid situation. The Bucks are not that far behind either team, either the Nets or the Sixers. They're third. So all of that is obviously going to be fluid. And I think this conversation apparently won't be relevant until like, the end of the season, because these teams, those 3 have clearly been the best this season as far as record wise and being consistently the winning teams in the East. And so I don't even know how you play the standings game when they're that close, but I think that's going to be something we monitor towards the end of the season, because it's, again, like one of these teams really stands out as one that's going to be really, really, really tough in the playoffs. The others, to me, just don't even seem that close. Like, I understand the Sixers and Bucks are legitimately good teams, but when you're talking about like translating the production from the best players into the playoffs, I'm not scared of Ben Simmons. I'm not scared of Tobias Harris.
Same.
We've seen their play go down before. We've seen what happens when teams focus their whole defense on Embiid, make him turn over the ball, make the other guys beat you, even if they got better shooters. Like, I think that's still how I feel about them. And the Bucks, we saw the game plan for how to beat them. And the Nets, I don't know what the game plan is. We haven't seen them in the playoffs yet. Like they're just going to be so offensively explosive that there's just no easy way for Miami to match up with them. Again, unless there's a theoretical world where Avery Bradley starts on Kyrie, but Avery Bradley has not been dependable this season. So it's like you know what I'm saying? There's no realistic way to match up with them other than having to go to the really creative defensive coverages, which is why I keep highlighting all this stuff, because it's like I want to see how Spo deals with players who he feels like are a problem one-on-one. And that's why I like seeing the way he's thrown different defensive coverages as superstars, because I just don't know what type of coverage you're going to throw at the Nets to throw them off.
It's a really good point. I mean, you're going to need 40-point Bam every night in that series, and you're also going to need
Bam to shut down KD.
That's what I was just going to say. It's like you talk about no ceiling, you talk about max player, and you talk about increased responsibilities. That is the series where Bam Adebayo will be given the most on his plate, no doubt. But you're right. Like the standings talk right now, I think is totally premature. I just think it's something for us to watch for in the second half of the season as we talk about things we're looking ahead at. I like where you're going with that about not avoiding Brooklyn on some sucker stuff, like more about like just
strategic.
if you can conveniently find your way into the other bracket, that would be good.
No tanking.
No tanking for sure. I'm going to close here and then we're going to sign off for tonight, because how much can we really talk about a New Orleans Miami game right before the All-Star break? Those guys are probably happy to get a few days off.
So are we.
And because the Heat are basically, I don't think they're represented at all by any like participant at All-Star weekend, which is a conversation for another day. But I want to close here and get your thoughts on, with the East so damn close, and the fact that the basically 4 through 10 is a crapshoot. You're within 2 games of each other. Like the more I sit with that, the more I think that that's going to spark movement, that like one of these teams that doesn't get into the playoffs often, whether it's like Chicago or Atlanta or whoever, or Washington, keeps making a push and they're like, oh, like we can actually convince Bradley Beal to stay. Let's make a move. Like, I feel like it's going to Charlotte is having a special year. Maybe they say like, let's go all in and do something big and go after a Vucevic in Orlando who's been sputtering lately. So Alex, I ask you this: one, do you think that the parity in the East will inspire movement, or is it actually going to do the opposite? And teams are going to kind of feel like, we're in the thick of this. We'll find our way. And two, does that put added pressure on Miami to keep up if some of these teams that they're fighting with in the standings actually do take a big swing for a player like, Vucevic in Orlando, or one of these other guys that can be traded from a pretender to a playoff contender?
Man, in my mind, it absolutely puts pressure on those teams. Like, I'm looking at the standings, like you said, Charlotte. You look at Chicago, who's right there in the thick of things. They've been pretty good all year. Like Atlanta, we know since the preseason that their owners have had expectations for them to make the playoffs this year, and that's why they fired Lloyd Pierce uh, from being the head coach. I mean, you look at the Knicks. Maybe they want to make. I mean, they already traded for Derrick Rose to try to bolster their rotation, make them a
That's
little
a
bit
really good
better.
one, though. That's a good one. They haven't been up there in a while. They're like dancing in the streets at 500 in New York City, so they may make a move. You're right.
And like it makes sense, but also like you said, if there's so many teams in the thick of things, because like this playing tournament has made it so that even teams like you said, the Hawks, the Wizards are 11 and 12. They're supposedly out of it. They're not far behind at all in the loss column from these other teams that are in it, and like their records are not good. Like the Wizards are 14 and 20. Like that is not. You would think that because some of these other teams are so close to 500, they will be far apart, but they're just not. The Wizards and the Atlanta Hawks are not far behind these other teams, and they're 11 and 12. So because so many teams are in the push for the playoffs, I wonder how many teams are actually going to be willing to make trades where they're selling off pieces to potential rivals in the playoff race. So that's kind of annoying, but the Heat should feel the pressure regardless, because I don't think like these teams here that we're talking about should be what's making the Heat like play defense. It should be, oh, we think that we're at the top of the conference. We're with them. We're not with this 4 through 10 group. Oh, we know that we're better in the standings. So that, to me, these other teams shouldn't have any influence on how the Heat are thinking. I think they need to make a trade, period, to get back into the group with the elites. And so to me, the answer is make a trade regardless.
No, I'm with you there. And I guess where I was going with that is that you have more competition for maybe the guys that you're going to target. You know what I
For
mean?
sure,
Like,
for sure.
whereas the market may have been, you got a bunch of Western Conference contenders that are trying to like shore up their rosters, and that's who's picking off these Eastern Conference teams. Cause like to your point, like Cleveland, yeah, they're at 13 in the standings, but they're going to be sellers. Detroit sellers. Orlando might be sellers. But then you got like the Washingtons and Atlantas right above them that like they would do anything to make the playoffs. Like that's just would be a huge accomplishment. So they're not going to be sellers. So it's just going to be interesting to see how that market shakes out and what kind of competitive landscape it makes for Miami with the limited assets they have. So that's another thing to monitor. All right. That was everything I had on my agenda to talk through for a recap of tonight's game. Again, the Heat 103-93 over the New Orleans Pelicans. Alex, you got anything you want to add before we close?
Not really. I feel like we went through a lot. We gotta congratulate the Heat for finally getting to 500. They're back in the sixth spot, outside of the play the play in tournament range. By the way, you asked that question before about what would be a success or not success. If the Heat get into the play in tournament, even as a 7th seed, that's an unsuccessful season. I don't
Gross.
care
Yeah.
how close they are to the
Ugh.
6th seed, the 5th seed, the 4th seed. They cannot end up there in the play-in tournament playing the likes of like the Bulls or something like that. That's embarrassing. You were just in the finals last year. No play-in tournament. That's my final statement.
There you go. No play-in tournament. That is the expectation for the second half of the season. We have now identified it officially. Thank you for listening. You'll have your regular host, Ethan Skolnick, back in the host chair as we dive into next week. We'll unpack All-Star Weekend a little bit, talk about the Heat going forward. And it's not the long break as usual, so the Heat will be right back at it beginning of next week. And you'll be hearing from us Monday for your Monday morning drive. Thanks for listening. Bye.